Hello, kind people of Oasis. I know it's been some time. We haven't had a month in review since February, I think, but that's because we've been working on some stuff in the background, which we'll go over in today's episode. I have some team members invited, so they'll be joining and give you guys some updates. But we do have some updates from our ecosystem. So let's go over those updates and see what the team has been shipping, and then we'll go over the behind the scenes upgrades. So we have a few new blogs, great case study. We have a new podcast sub-series, which I launched back in late February, beginning of March, and some developer tools worth knowing about. So let's start with published articles. And we have one article about Ekai, which is a private infrastructure. They're building a private infrastructure for AI agents. Basically, every time you switch AI models, your context drops. So every new session, your agents reset. And Ekai are building the infrastructure to fix that. Control plane that stores encrypted API keys via Sapphire with delegated access and instant revocation. And Contexto, which is a context layer that makes sure agents never lose their work across sessions. I think 6 providers are already live. It runs as an OpenFlow plugin and no migration needed. The blog article is up on our website. Then we have Flashback Labs. The article is called Building Private AI Interactions on Oasis. And what Flashback Labs are doing is building a conversational AI that helps people preserve life memories before they fade. Basically, the AI extracts structured data from conversations and turns them into short animated videos. It's handling some of the most sensitive data imaginable, so everything runs through Sapphire, files encrypted inside the confidential smart contract before they ever hit storage. Zero marketing spent, over 1,000 users, 700 on-chain transactions a day, and they're now expanding into Alzheimer's care and partnering with nonprofits in the US. Next up, we have a blog article called Decentralized Storage, Encryption, and Access Management. So basically, storing access on, for example, Filecoin or Arweave is basically publishing it online because any node can read it. So the blog article walks through how Sapphire plugs in as a privacy layer, encrypting files inside the TE before they reach the storage network. And with liquefaction on top, you get programmable access control, token gate a file, set an expiry, charge per access. The policy itself is private, so observers only see that access was granted or denied, not why. Then we have a thought piece, the privacy's final phase, which you can find on our Twitter page. It's tracing the arc from no privacy through partial obfuscation to programmable privacy, where you choose what's visible, to whom and under what conditions. It's a good one to share with anyone still thinking of privacy as an on-off switch. And I kind of touched upon this during some interviews when we were at TCC, which you can also find on our Twitter page. And last but not least, we have an blog article that teaches you how to vibe code with Oasis, because you no longer need to know Solidity to ship a confidential smart contract. So the team released an LLM's text file and the Context 7 MCP integration. So tools like Cloud Code, Cursor can pull live Oasis docs directly. Just type a prompt, the model handles the rest, and if you call it storage on the deployed contract in the Explorer, you get back zeros. The secret is on-chain and invisible. Next up, we were at TCC, of course. I'm sure you saw the post. We attended TCC in Cannes, second year in a row, connecting with builders and privacy people from across the ecosystem. The highlight at TCC was Peter's talk. Attestations alone are not enough, where he made the case that a static enclave, quote, doesn't actually prove trust. He argued that you actually need history, transparency policies, and continuous verification. And he walked through how Oasis and Ruffle turned those static quotes into a consensus verified trust system. The talk is up on our YouTube, of course, if you want the whole speech. And we had a great party at DCC on top of a hotel. The view was amazing. The weather was perfect. The perfect rooftop gathering, I would say. Over 400 people joined, and we had a full afternoon of panels. We had talks from Maya, Exec, Flair, and our own Nino, who's also here on the show today with us. And there was a panel at the end. Redstone and Space Computer joined as well. All the talks are up on our YouTube channel. If you want to take a look, I highly suggest giving them a glance because they're super interesting. And last but not least, as you know, not everything happened at major conferences. Our engineer Mateusz hosted an in-person session for undergraduate students in Celia, covering crypto fundamentals, scalability. I hope I pronounced that right, guys. Scalability, L2s, tokens, and private smart contracts, grassroots education, exactly the kind of thing that actually builds ecosystems long-term. And we also have a couple of content pieces. Myself, I launched a new sub-series, Privacy Talks. That's part of the Privacy Now podcast, where me, Matej, and Marco, who you're all familiar with, sit together once a month and discuss the latest happenings in crypto and AI. You can find the episodes on my Twitter profile and YouTube and Spotify. I usually share the links, and I'm going to include them in this episode as well. And we got a shout out in Messrs. TE report, which makes the case that privacy gap is the main reason institutional adoption is still lagging on chain. So if you need one piece of external validation to explain why what we're building matters, I think that report is it. And to conclude the ecosystem updates, we have some technical developments from our ecosystem, Midas, who we've partnered with a long time and supported. So we participated in the Series A round for Midas. Midas is a tokenization platform that's bringing institutional investment products on chain. So not just a financial bet, it's a signal about where we think the WA space is heading and kind of teams worth backing. Next up, Oasis with Diode Chain and Clean Connect AI, a new partnership to bring cryptographic proof to oil and gas certification. So Oasis, Diode, and Clean Connect AI, we're working together to establish verifiable trust for WA in one of the messiest, most opaque industries on the planet. Privacy infrastructure meets the physical world. And last but not least, Shape Rotator Hackathon. So our engineer Bern showed up at the Shape Rotator Hackathon to demo how to build private verifiable applications with Raffle. And it's live on the Encode Club YouTube channel. I'll include the link in the episode, so worth a watch if you're thinking about building. And I almost forgot, PawPad is now integrated with Oasis, basically launching secure verifiable AI trading agents powered by Raffle and Sapphire. So think of it as confidential execution meeting autonomous agents, meeting DeFi. Yeah, I think that would have sounded a bit science fiction 2 years ago, but it's now possible. But yeah, I think I could have done an entire episode with these updates, but alas, we have some other exciting news in this episode. So I'm going to hand off the floor to Patrick. Patrick, as you know, spends time in the BD and marketing departments here at Oasis. He's a great guy. He was in touch with a lot of people at ECC. But Patrick, I also want your opinion on how you think ECC was this year compared to last year, what the vibe was, what the direction of the industry is. So yeah, give us your insights, please.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Mikhail. So yeah, let me deep dive a bit more on the ECC. Just for context, for whoever is not aware, ECC is one of, we could call it like a flagship European crypto conference. Now, what flagship means, in a nutshell, it means that you have all the foundations there, all the like biggest projects and smaller, and it's perfect playground if you want to meet some people, I don't know, like pitch some ideas or just get some feedback on the stuff that we're building. Just as an example, so while ECC is the flagship crypto conference in Europe, in US that used to be ETH Denver, but now the focus is moving more towards New York. And for example, in Asia, I would say it was a Token 2049 in Singapore. As Mihna mentioned, so this is the second year that we had presence at the ECC, and it was quite a different one. I would say that the most notable thing was the amount of attendees, which I would say that they were maybe 30 to 40% of what it was last year. Now, yeah, it's debatable. Some people say that because it's a bear market. Others say that it's builders' time. So there was like more quality over quantity. But from my perspective, when it comes to ECC, as an attendee, you can play it from two different ways. One is that you go to the main conference, go through all the booths, talks, which there is a lot of booths and a lot of talks. The other, you can focus only on the side event. And the biggest difference with the last year is that there were less side events. And also like less projects showcasing on the booth. So I think that this year you had to be really way more structured in the approach in order to achieve your objectives. but yeah, I would say it was a pretty telling sign. The amount of attendees and also the amount of side projects. When it comes to our activities, Mihna already mentioned a few, but we had a booth for the first 2 days. Then Peter had a talk at one of the stages. I believe it was on Wednesday, and on Thursday we were hosting the private garden party together with Flare Network and DiExec. I believe we had close to 3,000 registrations, and it was packed and amazing, very good talks. I think that like the venue capacity was like at approximately 150 to 200 attendees in one time, and there was just constant rotation. Just as one of the like interesting fun fact, so 1 hour before the event closed, there was still like 30 to 40 people waiting in the queue, which is like pretty surprising, I would say. Okay, in terms of our focus, so on the booth, we were primarily focusing on one of the products that we have in the pipeline. Actually, one of the products that Nino is working on, and he's gonna present a bit more about that right after I finish. But yeah, in terms of the vibes, I think one of the biggest differences was that there was not so much AI in the focus as it was last year. But it was more like finance, payments oriented. That would be kind of like my take from here. Also, just one thing I need to mention that usually we were participating at the Global Hackathon, which this year we didn't. So yeah, that was the only difference. And I mean, it was pretty good when we got previous hackathon participants coming to our booth, and yeah, kind of like being disappointed that we're not there this year. So yeah, let me hand over to Nino now, just to deep dive a bit more into one of the products that we're getting the feedback on the booth.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Let me share the screen first. So before we dig into the announcement and what we are building right now, I would kind of like to touch a little bit of theory before that. So not so long ago, Cornell Tech has issued a paper coupled with Oasis TE technology, which essentially introduced the two new primitives. They're called key encumbrance and liquefaction. Now, this sounds super abstract, and how does this translate into technology? How can we use this? It's an academic paper. It's quite complex. But definitely we did work on that, and we translated these new concepts of how the keys can be encumbered inside TEEs, and the access towards those keys is programmable over policies, which essentially enables liquefaction. And by analyzing this paper and comparing it to our tech, we came up with a new solution that we're building right now, and it's called Flexvaults. Now, today, I'm going to walk you over a little bit of architecture for Flexvaults, some of the use cases, and how developers can utilize this once it's published and once it's done. So the key concept is we have a user layer. So this is where your dApp would essentially sit and users would interact with it. And then we have an SDK layer, which is essentially talking to Oasis TEs, right? So it's talking to confidential enclaves. Now, imagine your user requires a new account on a target chain. What essentially happens is we jump into an enclave, and a new private key for the target chain is generated inside the enclave. This part is called key encumbrance. So now user has a specific request. So they would like to either trade something or maybe sign a contract. And this intent or this request is passed to our SDK. And SDK is directly talking to the confidential enclave. What we can see here, the first step in the confidential enclave is essentially a policy engine. So what does this essentially mean? Well, let's say user wants to trade Ethereum for Solana or vice versa. This would be their intent. So you would send your intent into an SDK. SDK would first talk to the policy engine, and it would say, you know, this user wants to trade in an amount of $1,000. Now, if you programmed the policy that the maximum limit that user can trade at a single time is 100, then this policy would not be passed and nothing would essentially happen, right? So user's intent or user's request would be denied. Now let's repeat the same example where this essentially is positive, right? So user requires a trade which is within the policy limitation. What happens in this case? Well, essentially policy is passed, but private key is never exposed, right? So it gets decrypted inside an enclave and it signs the transaction because the policy was passed. So the theoretical thing here that is crucial to understand is essentially we're convincing policies to get the signature. We're never returned a private key. We're essentially passing the policies to decrypt the private key and then sign the transaction. Obviously, a signed transaction goes over a transaction executor, which can execute on any blockchain, smart contracts, or user assets. Yeah, when thinking about this system, it is crucial to mention, and this was a question that we were asked a lot on our booth when pitching this architecture. Users would ask, so do I need to deposit my assets or bridge my assets into Oasis? Essentially, the answer is no. What we are creating here is a confidential container where you're generating keys for a target chain, right? So the transaction is still executed on a target chain. It means the deposits are native in, native out, and the policies essentially are there to allow you signing those transactions on a target chain. So there is no bridging needed. Your assets still remain on the chain where you want to operate. Now, what does Flexvaults besides key encumbrance and liquefaction? Like I said, both quite abstract terms. What else do we offer here? Obviously, TEs are part of the architecture. Policy engine is part of the architecture, multi-chain, and all this is accessible over SDK. And this is the most primitive version of Flexvaults that you can already use. And what we are adding on top is essentially swap and earn services already integrated into Flexvaults. This essentially means that besides the key encumbrance and the programmable policies, you will also be able to send certain trading intents into our SDK, and we'll find a way to execute them fully privately, right? So one of the angles here is you can now swap on DeFi or enter DeFi yield products completely privately or obfuscated to a public mempool. Talking a little bit again about the policy engine. So how can those policies look like? What can you essentially achieve once the SDK is published? Well, there are some ideas that we have here, maybe like spending limits, which are limited to maximum a day, maybe whitelisting certain tokens, maybe trading within certain time windows. So as you can see, this becomes super programmable, and it can follow the best practices you already have in your business. And why is this superior to a multi-sig? Well, essentially, if we look at the architecture, as long as the policy engine is happy and you convince the policies to pass, the signature doesn't happen on the client side. It happens inside an enclave. So if you say, we want only to trade between Monday and Friday, well, this is totally possible because the signature will happen inside an enclave, and you don't need a multi-sig to do this. Lastly, let's touch a little bit on the use cases. We already talked about intent-based private trading, which is a part of the Flexvaults MVP, and you will be able to use it, as well as earn, right? So we are enabling routing to most popular earn protocols out there, but privately where this intent is hidden. And I would like to lastly mention two more use cases which are super cool, and they're coming essentially from the key encumbrance or policy, programmable policies approach. Now, imagine you're in DeFi in a totally non-custodial solution like Flexvaults, and you want to set a certain rule or certain automation where your position in Solana or Ethereum is getting monitored, and if it reaches a certain level of profit, the trade is automatically executed. So far in DeFi, this is not possible because you always require a signature from the user, or you are entering a custodial solution, which then executes this for you. Here we're merging both, right? So we're enabling a non-custodial solutions with dynamic rules that users can set, and certain orders can be therefore automatically executed due to the architecture of convincing policies to sign your transaction on a target chain, which we already talked about before. One more very cool use case is how are we connecting our AI agents like OpenClaw to trade on DeFi, right? When you look at most of the implementations that users use today, typically what they would do is put the private key, either in environment variables or in some middleware, but directly to the OpenClaw. Now, with the Flexvaults architecture, what you can do is you can encumber the private key, as we saw before. So the private key is born inside an enclave, and then use policies to say, okay, now you can only trade, $5 a day, and you can only be limited to these specific assets. Essentially, what this means, you created a very neat, trustworthy middleware with programmable guardrails, which AI cannot bypass. So this means your bot is now trading over the programmable policies, and it's convincing policies to execute a trade, but never has access to your private key. Now, these primitives can be expanded across multiple use cases like gaming, storage, DAO treasury, with multi-party policies, without multi-sig overheads, etc., etc. And we will be talking about this more in the future as Flexvaults are becoming release candidate ready and become part of our published stack and the documentation. With that said, I would say access is an instruction, not a compromise. Keep an eye out for our news and announcements to learn more about Flexvaults. Thank you.
Thank you, Nino. This has been great. And I'm actually taking the direction of the month in review. I'm changing the direction a bit. So we're going to have Oasis updates episodes instead of month in review. So every month, 2 months, whatever, whenever is needed, we're going to do one of these updates. I'm going to invite team members. We can give the community a glimpse into what we're building. And we are building a couple of other things besides Flexvaults. So stay tuned because we can't share updates yet, but things are exciting. Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining. I think Patrick already left, right? He was supposed to have another call. Okay. You're still here. I knew you were in a rush. Thank you so much, guys, for joining, for sharing news with the community. And I'll see you in the next episodes.
Thanks for having us, man. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Ciao.
Until then, as I always say, stay safe and stay private.